Good evening, I'm Fanashe and you're watching AWANI Tonight. Lendu Assemblyman Datuk Sri Sulaiman Md Ali has resigned as Melaka Chief Minister. The matter was confirmed by UMNO President and Deputy Prime Minister Datuk Sri Ahmad Zahid Hamidi. Sulaiman was sworn in as Chief Minister in November 2021 after Barisan Nasional won the Melaka state election. It has been speculated that Melaka UMNO Chief and current State Executive Councillor Datuk Sri Abdul Rauf Yusof will take over. Zahid previously confirmed that the Melaka administration structure would change with the formation of the unity government at the state level. Prime Minister Datuk Sri Anwar Ibrahim has announced several additional initiatives in Budget 2023. The national budget was tabled for a second reading in the Dewan Negara earlier today, with added Aidilfitri assistance and extension of individual tax relief, among others.
Maka saya bersetuju untuk menyalurkan bantuan khas keuangan Aidilfitri kepada 850,000 orang pekebun kecil getah, pesawah dan nelayan sebanyak RM200 lagi tambahan daripada yang telah diumumkan.
200,000 volunteers under the Malaysian Volunteer Department RELA, Civil Defence Force, Police and Fire volunteers will also receive RM300 for Aidilfitri. Apart from that, Anwar, who is also Finance Minister, announced an extension of individual income tax relief of up to RM8,000 for net savings in the National Education Savings Scheme SSPN until 2024.
Cadangan ini melibatkan kehilangan hasil kerajaan sekitar RM250 juta setahun dan memanfaatkan lebih 400,000 pembayar cukai.
Starting April 1st this year, Anwar said the government will also expand the target of the Syarikat Jaminan Kredit Perumahan SJKP housing credit to fixed and irregular income groups to have their first home, an initiative that is expected to benefit the B40 and M40 groups. Prime Minister Datuk Sri Anwar Ibrahim has hit back at claims that his administration has sidelined opposition states. Speaking in the Dewan Negara, he said the current government gave higher allocations to Kelantan, Kedah, Terengganu and Perlis than the previous governments.
Dan saya bersedia untuk membuat pindaan, penyesuaian setelah mendengar pandangan teguran, tetapi fitnah ini tidak boleh diteruskan. Dan fitnah ini kadang-kadang daripada pemimpin besar, termasuk ketua parti yang menyatakan bahawa zalimnya Menteri Kewangan ini kerana menindas dan tidak memberikan peruntukan kepada negeri-negeri atau melewatkan atau mengurangkan. Semua fakta itu salah.
Anwar, who is also Finance Minister, said Perlis received RM154 million this year, Terengganu RM400.1 million, Kelantan RM351.5 million and Kedah RM512.1 million. Each of the states had received higher allocations than in 2022. Earlier, some Perikatan Nasional leaders had criticised the 2023 budget for not giving allocations to opposition representatives. In other news, Bank Negara Malaysia expects Malaysia's GDP to grow between 4 to 5% in 2023. Its Governor Tan Sri Nur Syamsiah Muhammad Yunos says this is supported by firm domestic demand despite challenges rising from slowing global growth.
Our assessment is that the risks to the growth outlook are fairly balanced. Downside risks are largely from external developments, while upside risks are mainly from domestic factors.
Syamsiah said further escalation of geopolitical conflicts and a tight interest rate environment could also dampen the country's trade performance. On the domestic front, higher than expected inflation would weigh on spending as well as investment decisions. However, she added that improvements in labour market conditions, continued implementation of multi-year investment projects and higher tourism activity are expected to support private consumption and investment growth. Syamsiah also says blanket subsidies are not sustainable and will need to be rationalised, particularly petrol subsidies. She notes that certain subsidies are disproportionately enjoyed by high-income households.
The savings that is realized from the rationalization can then be channeled to the vulnerable groups, to support the vulnerable groups. So, and that's where, so we have, like I said, when it comes to structural reforms that we need to undertake, there are many areas that we need to undertake in order for us to secure a much more durable and sustainable recovery. So that ranges from creating high-paying jobs and also strengthening our social protection system, and for us to move to a greener economy.
The Health Ministry is committed to expedite the tabling of the Tobacco and Smoking Control Bill. Health Minister Dr. Zalia Mustafa says the bill will most likely be tabled in the next Parliament session. Her statement comes after the Malaysian Council for Tobacco Control (MCTC) had opposed the planned tax on all vape products before the Tobacco and Smoking Control Bill became law. MCTC, which comprises 70 NGOs, professional bodies and medical associations, said the tax would run counter to the government's intention to create a smoke-free generation of Malaysians by 2040. Meanwhile, the Malaysian Medical Association (MMA) also urged the government to get the Tobacco Control Bill passed first, before removal of nicotine from the list of controlled substances under the Poisons Act 1952. This is so that there will be control over the sale of vape products. MMA claimed that once nicotine is removed from the Poisons Act, vape containing the substance can then be sold to the public legally and with no control to prohibit the sale of these items to minors. In February, Prime Minister Datuk Seri Ibrahim announced that the government will impose an excise duty on liquid or gel products containing nicotine, with half the revenue to be allocated to the Health Ministry. We will go for a quick break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. The government announced that it will consider all proposals to boost the Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission's (MACC's) effectiveness, including placing it under Parliament's purview. K. Sudagaran Stanley, Deputy CEO of Centre to Combat Corruption and Cronyism (C4 Centre), said immediate reforms are needed to improve public trust towards the anti-graft agency.
The MACC is in serious trouble. They have a low perception of trust within public and Malaysians at large. And there's a serious issue that we need to deal with. So this is why I think the first thing, even when we talk about reforms, initiating reforms to the MACC, we have been calling for a true investigation into all the claims that were actually made by politicians from the opposition at that time, to investigate whether really the MACC was being used as a political tool at that point of time, come out with the findings, investigate Azam, his share trading issue, come out with the findings. And while all of this is going to also appoint a new commissioner via a parliamentary process, and that's what they're calling for, right? And then once we have come out with this entire reasoning, we've come out with all the findings of the investigation, then we can move towards actually moving forward to meaningful reforms towards the MACC, in which one of it is the idea behind this is one is to call for the placement of MACC in Parliament.
To avoid any abuse of power, Stanley stressed the need of a clear guideline on Parliament's involvement.
We need to look in detail as to the powers of Parliament, right? For example, do we want to give powers to Parliament to actually stop an investigation or ask them to initiate an investigation? So these are things that we need to look at, right? So for example, we cannot give the powers to Parliament to actually stop an investigation. So the commission itself should be free to investigate anyone, but probably they only come into Parliament to give a report on what are the issues, for example, or what the findings are. So all those little things need to be looked into further detail. But the idea here is to ensure that the commission is able to perform without any interference, freely of political interferences. And as it is right now, it is not in the way that it should be, because clearly there's a lot of room for actually political interference, especially when the Prime Minister has the power to appoint, and especially when the Commission is actually under the Prime Minister's department.
Stanley emphasized that the first step towards reforming the MACC should be appointing a new chief commissioner via parliamentary process.
Immediately remove Azam from his posting and to appoint a new chief commissioner via a parliamentary select process. This can be done immediately. This can be done even without going through any amendments to the constitution or to a law and so on, right? Because the Prime Minister has the power to do that. The select committees that are actually being formed now, especially the one on anti-corruption and governance and human rights, this particular parliamentary select committee can actually decide, okay, let's, for example, choose who the commissioner is, run the entire process of interview and choosing the candidates, and let's get a two-third vote in parliament to actually get this person appointed and let the new person take on the job. That itself, this first action itself will help bring back some sort of credibility towards the MACC.
On to the international front, the Chinese government has threatened retaliation if Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen meets the US Speaker of the House this week. It also urged the US not to let her transit through the country, saying it would be a provocation. But Tsai struck a defiant tone, saying that external pressure would not stop Taiwan from engaging with the world. Tsai will travel to Guatemala and Belize, passing through New York and Los Angeles on the way back. Although not officially confirmed, she is expected to meet with US House Speaker Kevin McCarthy when in California. The US meanwhile said such transits by Taiwanese presidents were routine and that China should not use Tsai's trip to take any aggressive steps against Taiwan. China, which claims democratically ruled Taiwan as its own territory, has repeatedly warned US officials against meeting Tsai, seeing it as support for the island's desire to be seen as a separate country. Meanwhile, in Mexico, at least 38 people have died in a fire at an immigration detention center near the US border. According to authorities, the fire was believed to have been started by migrants protesting against their deportation. Many of the victims had traveled from Central and South America trying to get to the US. The fire broke out late Monday at the National Migration Institute facility in Ciudad Juarez. Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador said the fire was started by migrants in protest after learning they would be deported or moved. The incident had sparked protests after CCTV footage showed guards at the detention center leaving as flames engulfed a cell with migrants trapped inside. Anger grew outside the detention center, with relatives chanting for justice near a makeshift shrine dedicated to the victims. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres called for a thorough investigation into the fire. The shooter who killed 6 people at a school in Nashville, Tennessee, had bought 7 guns from 5 different stores and hid them at home. Authorities say the suspect, Audrey Hale, had been receiving treatment for an emotional disorder and that Hale's parents did not realize the guns had been concealed in their house. Hale, who was killed during the Monday attack, was armed with 2 assault rifles and a handgun upon entering the Covenant School. 3 children aged 9, 2 teachers and a school custodian died in the attack, which revived public debate over gun rights in the US. Tennessee has no laws that allow police to seize guns from violent suspects. Hale had prepared detailed maps of the school and left a written manifesto that suggested attacks at other locations were planned. In the search for a motive, Nashville Police Chief John Drake said there is some belief that the shooter held resentment for having to go to that school. That is all we have for you on AWANI Tonight. I'm Fana Sheh. Thank you for watching. If it is